So retail is a catalyst for economic development. We are just so lucky to have with us today Lacy Beasley. She is the president of Retail Strategies. This is a full-service advisory firm that works with municipalities on business recruitment through commercial real estate connections. Now, Lacy has prior experience with the shopping center group, but she has also worked in economic development herself. She was with the Dixon County Chamber of Commerce before she joined Retail Strategies. So definitely we know that Lacy's got the personal knowledge of the connections that need to be made between public and private sectors to make some of these things happen. There are so many awards that we can talk about. Birmingham Business Journal named Lacy as one of the top 40 under 40. Nationwide, top 100 influencers in commercial real estate, and many others. So really, we are so fortunate to have you with us today, Lacy, and I appreciate you taking time out to join us.
Yes, thank you, Alyssa. Thank you for that great introduction, and thank you for having me today. I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
So are we. We got a lot of registrations for this one, and I wanted to say that, of course, this is coming up ahead of ICSC Las Vegas. I know that's a really big event for many people. Whether you're attending or not, we know that retail is very, very important for most of our clients and communities across North America, in fact, clients around the world. Retail often is part of the lifeblood of any community, right? I mean, this is where we have the character of the place where we live.
Absolutely. We are really looking forward to Vegas. We're sending 36 people. Our team here in Birmingham, we have basically it's one company, two strong brands. So we have our full service commercial real estate firm, Retail Specialist, and Retail Strategies, and we have about 35 going. So I'll be headed out on Friday, and then we'll have some on Saturday and some on Sunday, but about 25,000 people there, 25,000 of your best friends. The developers, brokers, the retailers will all be together just talking about how we can build communities. And something really cool about ICSC is that they actually rebranded recently. So it used to stand for International Council of Shopping Centers pre-pandemic. And at that time, ICSC was about 65 years old. And when they initially formed, it was kind of this concept of, you have an idea, I have an idea, let's exchange ideas, and we'll both walk away with two ideas. It started pretty small with mall owners primarily, and a handful of retailers like Sears and Walmart. And they got together 68 years ago. So during the pandemic, ICSC thought, well, let's go through a rebrand, and started asking a lot of their members about what does ICSC mean to them, and then even thinking pretty far in the future, what is ICSC going to mean to communities 65 years from now, or developers or retailers or the general 50,000 members that they have. And the rebrand is now ICSC Innovating Commerce Serving Communities. So I'm thrilled to see that ICSC has brought together this connection of commerce and community, because if you think about it, what's going to last long term, it's going to be those two things. So with this year, with ICSC coming up, they with the Vegas show, this will really be our first year full-fledged back on since the pandemic. We've done a couple shows, but none quite to the scale of everybody running and blowing and going again. So we're all really excited about it, just super energized. So if you're going to the show in Las Vegas, please stop by our booth. We're going to be in the South Hall, the lower level. We'll be at 656. So we'll all be there as Retail Strategies, and we'll have some swag for you. And we're even having an event on Saturday night. So be sure and email me. I can send you those details, or come find us. We'd love to see you there.
Amazing. Okay, Las Vegas is not overwhelming enough. Now you get to see 25,000 of your closest friends, but so much great information and opportunities to learn and to network. I have just passed you the controls, so let's see if you can see that. I'm going to leave this to you now to walk us through some of these best practices and talk to us about retail as a catalyst for economic development.
Absolutely, would be happy to. And just once again, I really appreciate all of you as attendees for being a part of today. Please go ahead and plug in your questions as we go through them. As we go through this, we'll take them at the end. We do want to leave plenty of time on that. I value your time, and that you're spending it with us here today means a lot. And we want to be sure and answer any questions that are burning on your mind. And thank you once again to GIS Planning for allowing me to speak with you today and setting up this webinar. It goes back to the NREDA, National Rural Economic Development Association. So Brian Beatty and I were there together, and I spoke on this subject, and it really just kept evolving to let's get to a point where we can have a webinar, because there's a lot of people interested in the subject about how retail is a catalyst for economic development. So when you think about traditional economic development, then the thought is go after high paying jobs, and the rooftops follow that, and retail takes care of itself. And I think today's environment, we really have to challenge that. We understand that retail is community development, it's capacity building. There's a lot that comes into play with retail, but with economic development and retail and how that fits into the holistic economic development plan, I think you really have to think bigger picture now. We are no longer a generation like maybe the baby boomer generation that would get an automotive job, move to that city, and stay in that one job for 30 years. Our younger generation, they'll change jobs every 3 to 5 years. They'll move cities multiple times throughout their career. So what makes people move to a community? How do you build a workforce? Well, you make your community cool and vibrant, and you do that through having places to shop and places to eat, a great downtown. And that's why we are so passionate about retail, all things retail recruitment and retail retention. There's a lot of communities that are very interested in getting new retailers to their community, but the challenge comes into play with having the right resources. Having the time you can allocate to retail. There's a big learning curve on this. You have to learn how to speak the retail language, knowing who to talk to. I know some communities I talk to say, oh yeah, I talked to Chick-fil-A and they said they're coming. I said, who did you talk to at Chick-fil-A? Well, the manager of the neighboring Chick-fil-A. Well, they're not in charge of the real estate. So the real estate manager, is it the tenant rep broker? Is it the preferred developer? Is it the multi-unit franchisee? Is it the property owner? Who is involved with the conversation that you had? So those connections can be a huge challenge. And then ultimately just the experience, knowing that deal term. So cities want retail, they get it, economic development directors want it, but the question just comes into play, how do you do that? And that's why we exist as a company at Retail Strategies, is to help cities navigate those waters. Now, we said in the introduction of this webinar, we'll talk about the difference in retail recruitment and industrial recruitment. There's a lot of similarities and there's a lot of differences. So similarities is that both of these categories right now, the challenge is workforce and housing. Those are two things that they both need desperately. Where do they differ? It's specifically on the site selection, and the process for it. Industrial recruitment's very different, where that one plant might only open 1 or 2 within 10 locations within 10 years. Retail's very different. We're going to talk through a lot of retailers that are expanding, but retailers will expand 50 to 1,000 units every single year. So when you're thinking about regional planning, you can go after retail and have multiple locations, or you can even think about those retail brands that are in your neighboring community that you want in your community, and they can land there. So it's a process that repeats itself. You can create a lot of wins through retail. They're very different from industrial recruitment. So in the site selection, so extremely particular. It's not all just quality of life aspect. It's not all just workforce. It's things like the traffic, the ingress egress, how easy it is to work with the city, the co-tenancy, the retail synergy, the workforce. I mean, where the major employers are, their schools. So there's a lot that comes into play that really matters here. So just to give you a sampling, I hit on this earlier for just a brief second on who we are, where we came from. So about 18 years ago, our founders, Robert Jolly and Meade Silsby, started Retail Specialist as basically a retail site selection firm representing Starbucks at that time, doing all their retail expansion throughout the Southeast. And during the Great Recession, several cities said, I want retailers in my community. So Retail Strategies was formed from that time. We have about 70 team members with a Birmingham office, with Birmingham being our headquarters. We have an office in Atlanta, Fort Worth, and Starkville as well. So the only thing that changes for our team is who our client is. In some cases, it's the retailer, sometimes it's the owner of the property, and in some cases, it's the municipality. But in all things we do, we look at community advancement through retail. So let's hit on a high level. What are some of the trends and how do they help determine how we're making decisions today to lay the groundwork for tomorrow? So first, we're going to start with the sales. We always look at retail sales year over year, and you see this is all over the board. There was a lot of disruption through COVID, of course. So you see this substantial dip in April of 2020, as we all know. That was right after the pandemic was announced. And then you fast forward and you see a spike, and that spike comes into play right here. This is 53% year over year retail sales increase. So the stimulus checks actually came out in March of 2021. So where those were meant to, pay our rent and things like that, we all went out and bought new sweatpants and renovated our homes during that time. So retail sales actually did very well during the pandemic, which a lot of communities I work with, and we primarily work in communities with population of 50,000 or less, I said, you know what, I did great during the pandemic, much better than expected. So on average, during these years of 2021 and 2022, retail sales increased by about 18% year over year. It's a huge spike. Typically, you see retail sales going up about 4% a year, so you can see how substantial that really is. And retail sales are continuing to rise. Predictions are this year we'll end up with about 6% year over year. Now, obviously, this is impacting inflation, and that's the big question everybody's asking. So, with retail sales continuing to go up in Q1 of 2023, I think that made the feds a little nervous. So they've hiked interest rates again, and that has put a damper on retail sales. So we're starting to right size again, get back to those pre-pandemic levels, which is really what we need in order to reduce inflation. But what's happened that we saw a huge increase, and I'm sure you experienced it as well, is in e-commerce. People are still shocked by the fact that overall retail sales that are conducted online are still only about 15%, rounding up here, about 15% of the marketplace. We saw a big spike during 2022, during the pandemic, where it went up to about 16% during that time. And now it's kind of tapered off. So what retailers know is that they have to have both. They have to have brick and mortar and online sales. Excuse me. And that's called omni-channeling. So e-commerce is critically important. You're seeing these retailers that are really pushing innovation. That's a key takeaway we're seeing post-pandemic is innovation. Retailers like Chipotle and Chick-fil-A are doing a great job with their app. Walmart already had a section of drive-through, but now you can order your groceries online with Walmart. They will either deliver them to your home or you can come do the curbside pickup. Instacart is doing this, and then all the meal delivery places as well. That's all counting as online sales. So it's interesting that every retailer knows they have to have both. When you look at Amazon, they've tried to enter into the retail real estate world and have physical locations, and it's sort of the land of misfit toys. Every concept they've tried they've attempted and failed. But meanwhile, you have Walmart and Target catching up to Amazon because they have adopted online sales in a very successful way. So of these retail sales, the lion's share of them are still Amazon, about half of all the retail sales are done by Amazon, but that is starting to change and shift. You don't have a lot of retailers that are just pure play online only anymore. You think about Wayfair, Overstock, eBay. Those are some of the still dominant brands in this space, but this is a trend that we're seeing here to stay. And again, the term for that is called omni-channeling. Another post-pandemic change that we saw was there were several retailers that ended up filing bankruptcy. But these are retailers that were on the watch list for years. before they actually filed bankruptcy. We knew that it was time. And so it's kind of a natural pruning of retail real estate. And what that did was it left room for new and emerging brands to come in and fill those vacant spaces. As those vacancies, that second generation, third generation space has been filled up, now there's been very limited new construction, and we're getting to the point where rental rates are starting to rise again. It's a real challenge. There's a bit of a deadlock between what's happening in the marketplace right now. I'm on the board of trustees for ICSC there to represent communities, and in January all of the board was together and we were talking about what our industry is seeing. So there's about 20 directors of real estate for retail brands in there, and another 50 that are the top owners of all the real estate across the country. And what we found is that it's becoming more and more of a challenge because retailers are saying we can't pay more rent because we have increased labor costs, we have increased shipping costs. We are having a lot of challenges with supply chains not being able to get our fixtures in. It's not the supply chain with the product so much as it is the supply chain with shelves and fixtures and things of that nature. That's starting to loosen up, but it was a huge challenge for these retailers. So they can't necessarily afford to pay more rent. Oh, and certainly inflation of product. That's a big part of it as well. Now you look at the landlords and the developers saying, well, we can't build our building without you paying more rent because our cost of construction's gone up, our cost of financing's gone up, the cap rates have changed, so we're having challenges as well. And I lay all that groundwork to say that it's a really critical time for public-private partnerships, so important for you as a city manager, an economic development organization, or community leader to build a strong relationship with the developers you know, whether they're in your community or maybe you've recently seen a new development in a neighboring community. Find out who developed it, call that developer, and let them know you're open for business if you are. Just see what that might look like. If they have the retailer interested in the market and the developer has the interest, but there's a gap in the pro forma, that can oftentimes be closed by some sort of creative tax incentive that needs to happen. Now, that varies state by state. We have a good representation of states from across the country on this webinar, so I won't dive into the details of those incentives state by state, but I would consider you to take a look at that because it's more important now than it's ever been because of the rising cost and the difficulties that are out there. But the good news is retailers are still looking to expand. So they're very proactively going out there and saying, how do we find new locations? You see where restaurants really dominate in the categories of retail expansion. And when I say retail, I'm just naturally incorporating restaurant in that because we do all things. QSR stands for quick service restaurants. That's one of our industry terms. So now you've learned omni-channeling and QSR is two of our terms. So keep that in your vocabulary and the experience level of those gaps you want to fill on retail recruitment. So you can see where restaurants are really dominating. This is the number of new units from publicly traded companies that opened across the country. And if you think about it, what drives this expansion? They're publicly traded. They want to keep their investors happy. How do you keep your investors happy? You either increase same-store sales, which happened during the pandemic, and two, you build new locations. Each new location is going to be profitable if you do your job well as a site selector, as a tenant rep broker, or as a real estate manager or deal maker. So that will be a profitable location, makes Wall Street happy. So that's why these retailers like to announce that they're expanding new locations and opening new locations. So as there was an infusion of new cash from the same store sales increasing, that's being deployed through real estate. So several retailers are very aggressively expanding right now, and you can see that going down the list. Now, we'll say department stores continue to be struggled, and you can go down and see where some of them are not as aggressive with their expansion. QSRs, quick service restaurants, absolutely. When it comes to casual dining from publicly traded companies, not very many. So when you think about the Red Lobster, Olive Garden, Chili's, Applebee's, those brands, Olive Garden, not as much expansion there. Now there's a tiny bit happening. It's not completely dead like it was a couple of years ago, or the last 10 years really. There's a little bit of new expansion there, but the majority is in beverage, which is going to be things like coffee or smoothies, and also in chicken. That's where we're seeing the big expansion there. So let's talk about some of those brands. Obviously, the dollar stores are dominating. Every year for the last decade, Dollar General's done around 1,000 new units per year. Dollar Tree expansion is around 350 new units. Five Below around 200 new units. TJ Maxx is looking to do about 200 new units. Starbucks has announced that they want to add 2,000 new units by 2025. So they are aggressively looking at rural America as well. So I think this is certainly something to keep your eye on, the Starbucks expansion. Burlington used to be Burlington Coat Factory. They've rebranded. They're doing a great job of taking that second generation space. Chipotle was really the sweetheart of the pandemic in the way that they innovated very quickly and did some awesome things with delivery, curbside pickup, and their app right now, they're testing a new concept called Chipotle Lane, which is drive-through only. You order on your app, you pay on your app, you drive through the lane and you pick up your order. It's super quick, super efficient. And we as consumers have adopted this model very quickly. So you might see more Chipotle lanes out there. This is really helping the retailers in their prototype because they're able to shrink their in-store dining or not have any in-store dining, which is helping them with labor. It's helping them with speed and efficiency, and we as consumers are liking it as well because it's convenient and fast. We're not necessarily going into these QSR restaurants and eating inside. Chipotle is a fast casual is the category you call Chipotle, but Smoothie King, very aggressive expansion, and McDonald's as well, about 200 new locations. Kohl's is doing a small market prototype, specifically seeking public-private partnerships. So keep that in mind. Casey's General Store, around 350 new locations. This is it's kind of a gas station on steroids. It's a general market and gas station that specifically looks for rural towns. So here's a handful of others. Pop Shelf, I'll point them out. They are a brand that is branched out of Dollar General, and they like to say they're for the soccer mom. They're like the Five Below for the soccer mom. That's what they claim as their market that they're going after. Ulta is anchoring a lot of shopping centers. So what we're seeing now is our usual suspects that are lined up in a shopping center that's new construction anywhere over 100,000 square feet. You're going to see Ross, TJ Maxx, Ulta, Hobby Lobby, Burlington, in some cases maybe Five Below. And then your out parcels will have Chipotle, Panda Express, Panera, Whataburger, or one of the chicken Popeyes, one of the chicken users. I'm going to point out Target. Target is finally doing their 150,000 square foot store again. So it's been since 2007 since they've done an aggressive expansion in this space. So they're doing 23 net new locations. 35 locations, 23 net new. So I'm going to encourage you, anytime you see a retailer's closing or expanding, really try to focus on that net new number because it's a natural pruning of real estate. These retailers are going to take their underperforming stores and close them, and then they're going to open new stores in better locations. This is also a case for shopping local. And when I say shop local, I don't only mean shopping with your local merchants. I mean also shopping in the brick and mortar in your community, because the better these retailers perform in your community, the more that word spreads, the more retailers want to be there, number one. And number two, it prevents them from closing if they're operating below their average annual sales volume that they want to be at. Costco is a great one that's actively expanding as well right now. So let's break it down in grocery stores. You know, we love to eat as Americans, right? It's all about the restaurant and the grocery. And most of the communities I work with, those are the two categories that they want most. So Aldi has added, this is number of square feet, and you have to do it that way because brands like H-E-B will open 30,000 square feet or 200,000 square feet. So 1.8 million square feet from Aldi grocery store. H-E-B is a great brand out of Texas that's just one of my favorite grocery stores in the country. They're phenomenal. Publix out of Florida is doing a big expansion, so we're seeing that all throughout the Southeast, and they're starting to penetrate in the northern markets as well. Grocery Outlet continuing to expand. Whole Foods Market and Sprouts. So those are the grocery stores that have added the most square footage in 2023. Now let's look at some of the pressure points. I talked about some of these earlier. The one I did not hit on is retail crime. Organized retail crime is the biggest threat to our brick and mortar industry today that we've seen since the threat of e-commerce to brick and mortar industry. So when e-commerce came out, then there was this big narrative about the retail apocalypse. E-commerce was going to kill brick and mortar retail. And that scared investors, and they started pulling their investment away from retailers. It was not good for our industry. Well, as that has corrected itself and we've realized we're probably going to cap out at around 20%, we'll probably never go above 20 to 25% in overall retail sales being conducted online. So investors are back and pleased with brick and mortar retail. But here's the big threat to our industry today is nonviolent theft. And there's so much theft now that there's organized agencies that will go in and rob these retailers of all their product, walk straight out, and the associates of the retail brands, they're told to not have any kind of altercation for their safety. And people know this, so they just go in, steal whatever they want from the store, and anything under $1,000 typically is not prosecuted, and that word is out on the streets, and it's a real challenge. So you think about going into Hibbett Sports and just stealing that pair of Air Jordans, or going into Lowe's and walking out with a TV. There's things like that are happening right now that the retailers are saying they're lying in their pro forma sales. The line of shrink or theft has increased by about 50% over the last 2 years. So this has to be stopped, and we're all trying to work on solutions for this right now. Definitely with local law enforcement, think about how you can provide some help and solutions here. Work with your existing property owners to offer that service. It will really carry its weight in gold in building your relationship with them. So let's talk about the economic impact of retail. Again, state by state, this very much varies of what the retail sales tax collection is on a state level, county level, or local level. But Chick-fil-A is the other one I want to point out. Every time I speak at any event, I ask people what brands they would like to see, and it's always Target, Chick-fil-A, or Trader Joe's. Those are the three that I always hear about. So I want to point out Chick-fil-A specifically because pre-pandemic, one unit in 1 year would do about $4 million. So this is the average sales volume per unit per year. And they doubled that during the pandemic. So Chick-fil-A is doing the same sales volume as a TJ Maxx might do. It's wild to look at the volume. I mean, that's a lot of chicken, right? But I want to go down the line to say, what does this mean if you apply your local retail sales tax? I mean, something even like a Dunkin' Donuts at close to $1 million a year. If you have a 2% local sales tax, that's $20,000 annually that's added to your bottom line. But it's also several jobs. So on average, a fast food restaurant will employ around 30 part-time jobs equivalent to 15 full-time jobs. And you can see that go all the way up the list to a Costco, Walmart will employ close to 300 people. We just have 40 million plus, but on average, a Costco is going to do about $150 million a year. On average, a Walmart will do around 90 million a year. Home Depot, about 40 million a year. So you go down the list and it can really add up in the number of jobs. So you ask, is retail economic development? I'd argue yes, it absolutely is. The jobs, the tax base it increases, and guess what? If you form a public-private partnership and find a way to incentivize these retail brands or developers to come to your community, that is a dollar that is located within, those brands are within your municipal boundaries, and that comes directly back to you. You can heavily incentivize a manufacturing plant, but there's no guarantee that the residents will actually all live in your community. So I consider you to think, I challenge you to think about the similarities and differences again in traditional economic development, industrial recruitment, and retail recruitment. You need both. They're both critically important, but traditionally retail's been a big ignored in this, and we think that it's very, very important. So you can see here from the National Retail Federation, this is a source that you can go to, and you can just look it up, National Retail Federation, go to Retail Impact. You can pull up your state, and you can see the number of jobs that are retail jobs versus every other category. Excuse me. It's a great chart to look at, and you can see that typically 1 in 4 jobs in America is a retail job. So I encourage you to do that. So now let's think about the difference in national versus local. And how am I doing on time? Am I getting tight, Alyssa?
Yeah, we're a little tight. We're going slightly over, but I think that's okay if you've got a couple more slides to wrap up, and I see there's quite a few questions in there as well.
Sure. Well, let's do this. I'll talk about national versus local. So I believe wholeheartedly in local retail. It's the heart, soul, character, vibrancy of your community. It's all about downtown and revitalization. So think about those national brands, those local brands and how you can really support them. You need the national brands too. So definitely take that holistic approach again to a combination of national brands and local entrepreneurship. Local entrepreneurship is going to support your tourism, your sense of community. National brands are going to support your daily goods and services, your jobs, and your sales tax base. So take a look at both of those as you're looking at your plan. So with that, I'll go ahead and I would love to take any questions we can. We can go ahead and kill the deck and get back to, the screens. There we go.
Perfect. And I know, Lacy, there's so much great data in here. Maybe we're going to be sharing the full slide deck with everyone, and they'll have your contact information, so we can see that carry through. Okay, so from an economic development perspective, what is some of the data that retailers need when they're looking for locations? What is some of the data that economic developers can offer to help them make those decisions?
Yeah, that's a great question. So a lot of it is going to be on your population, your income, and your growth, but it's so important to think about your retail trade area. So what we do is we use mobile tracking data. It's a little scary, but it's real. If your location services are on your phone, then we can track that. So we will geofence the Walmart or the largest retailer in town. We will see where people spend the majority of their evenings. And then that helps us customize that retail trade area. Municipal boundaries are invisible to retail brands. All they care about is their location in proximity to the potential consumer. And so think about it that way, and that you customize that retail trade area, come up with the population, income, and growth as the main things. And then look at the categories of retail leakage, and that's what we really focus on, is what are the categories where people are leaving that trade area to buy their goods and services elsewhere, and how do we plug that gap with new retail brands?
Does it help, like one of the things that we can do through Zoom Prospector is help people map out suppliers, competitors, other categories within a sector? Is that useful information to be able to provide?
Oh, absolutely. What the resources that you have at GIS Planning are phenomenal. They're fantastic for all of it. So what I love about what you do is you are focused on all the sectors, and you really help in industrial recruitment, economic development. So important. We're focused on retail only. So our data and knowledge is very, very narrow, but Zoom Prospector is a great example of where you can have a one-stop shop for data and look at all of it. So yes, certainly look at that, the population, but then you also want to really look at your real estate, your available real estate that you have, and get to know those property owners and know them well, and have that in your back pocket, that full inventory. Come up with the retail brands that you would like to see in your community that are not currently there. And then you want to play matchmaker between that retail brand and that real estate. but a big part of it is really understanding what is the site selection criteria. So yes, I definitely, for all the clients of GIS planning on here, use Zoom Prospector. It's your friend, it's your tool. Data is critically important, but how to go beyond the data is going to be the relationships you form and really building your knowledge base around this subject. So again, I applaud all of you who have hung with us over time here today to learn more about retail, because that's certainly how you become very powerful, is use the data that GIS planning is providing to you or that other sources out there can provide to you, and then start those conversations to move things forward.
Well, if you don't mind sticking with us for a couple more minutes, there are some great questions coming in. And I know some folks maybe have had to go, but since we'll get the recording, maybe we'll take another couple of them. What are some of the most common incentives offered by rural municipalities when it comes to retail? Are there any creative incentives that, like, maybe leaders don't necessarily have thought of before, but other strategies that might lure those folks in?
Yeah, absolutely. So they don't all have to be financial incentives. So what I'm hearing from a lot of retail brands right now is they're frustrated at how slow the permitting process is. So we did an entire webinar on time kills deals. You can go to retailstrategies.com and find that. We have a lot of resources in there. So just retailstrategies.com, go to resources and look through and download any of those white papers, look at any of those webinars. But the one, Time Kills Deals, talks specifically about the incentive of time, which is non-monetary. But I'm seeing a lot with TIF, tax increment financing, and it would be an incentive to the developer who would master plan the full shopping center. We're seeing pilots in some cases. In Texas, it's the Chapter 380. In Alabama, it's Amendment 772. What we like about the way that Alabama law structures it is it's a sales tax revenue sharing program, which you can also do in Louisiana and Illinois, if I'm not mistaken. What we like about sales tax revenue sharing is you look at your local sales tax and you take about half of it, give it back to that developer over time, and it's a real number. Sometimes when you do a property tax TIF, it's an estimate of future value, and that can be a little bit harder to determine. So those are a handful of incentives. So think about time, TIF, pilot, and depending on what state you're in, then look at those things. There's also the business improvement districts that you can do overlays and special taxes for.
And I have one final question here for us today, which is, what do you see happening with lifestyle retail food presently and going forward?
A lifestyle food. So that's so there's a lifestyle center, which is live, work, shop, play, all in one area. So lifestyle food, is this a chef to take? Depends on what you're talking about. So there's Lifestyle Center, which is the new anchor of the Lifestyle Center is that local restaurant. That's something really interesting. In the past, when we developed shopping centers, it wasn't built around restaurants, and it certainly wasn't built around local brands. We as consumers have said, we want that, we need it. So the restaurant is the new anchor of a shopping center. So let's take a pivot and talk specifically about some of these chef-driven restaurant concepts that are so critically important and growing right now. I would go ahead and tell all of you, if you haven't been to Yelp and looked at the restaurants in your community, I highly encourage you do that. If you see that they have an unclaimed presence, then they need to add that. So there's a lot. Restaurants are more important now than they've ever been in commercial real estate, and I encourage you to really foster that growth.
Okay, great, excellent. Let me just bring our this back up on the screen so that I could show our, it's locked me out for some reason. I want to be able to show our contact information on the screen, but it doesn't seem to be able to let me do that. Very curious. All right, so I'm going to share that with us in the background then, and see what we could do to get that through to you at another time. But I think what we're going to do then is actually ends for today, and I'm going to be in touch with everybody with information about how to reach Lacy if you have any additional questions, if there's anything that you want to get to her. You could do that. You can also contact us with any questions. You'll have her slide deck, so you'll be able to see all this information. and we can take it from there. Lacy, thank you so much. This was really, really juicy. I was taking so many notes throughout your presentation, and I know we had really great attendance here. I'm sure there will be follow-up questions for you. Enjoy ICSC.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited about it. Thank you for all of you attendees. Retail's fun to talk about. We all shop, we all eat, we can all relate. So if we can help you in any way, then please reach out. Let us know. retailstrategies.com. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. And of course, our own Brian Beatty will be there as well. I'm sure he'll stop by, come and see you.
Oh, yeah. I'm planning on seeing him. He's coming to our networking event on Monday night. So if any of you are coming, please stop by our booth. We'll get you an invitation to our event at Brewdog. It should be pretty fun.
Sounds great. Thank you very much and have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.